Hi there and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now in today's episode we're just continuing on with the coal merchant's yard and the two workshop buildings and just finishing off a few details. So one of them is a fix that I do to the pavement area where the driveway entrances are. The next one is adding some roof to the actual workshop buildings and creating a bit of a roof structure for that. And then we look at adding some coal to the coal staves, and then finally we add some gates to the vehicle entrance for the coal merchant's yard. So before we begin, I'd just like to say a big massive Happy New Year to everyone, and also a huge thank you to all the wonderful comments and feedback that's come in the last couple of videos, and the wonderful wishes from so many people with regard to Christmas and the New Year. So it's absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to respond to any of those wishes and so forth that have come in, but I will endeavour to do so over the next week. But nonetheless, I just thought I'd like to say that to everyone. Absolutely wonderful, lovely stuff. So there's a whole lot of little wee sort of itty-bitty jobs involved in today's video, which centres of course around the coal merchant's yard and the workshops. So one of the things that came up in a comment actually from the last video was the entrance into the coal yard. There was actually no drop curve, and the idea of vehicles just trying to ride up on the curve and over the paving slabs seemed like a rather unrealistic concept. So after the video I did actually realise I should have put a drop curve in there. So the first part of this video actually just goes into a little bit of remedial work for that pavement and how I went about actually fixing that up to have a drop curve in there and have a proper driveway entrance. So the next thing I look at is building a roof structure for the workshops and devising a way so I can actually lift these roofs out if I need to do so. So the next component after that is adding some coal to the coal staves, and then finally we add some gates to the vehicle entrance into the coal merchant's yard. So I think without further ado, let's just jump into what I got up to in this episode. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is integrating a dropped curve here. So as I mentioned, one of the comments was theoretically this should be a drop curve for the vehicle entry, and they're absolutely right, and it was basically an oversight on my part, and I actually looked at it after the last video and I actually thought, I should have put a drop curve in there. So there's a little bit of surgery involved here. So what I've done is laser cut a new section of pavement area with some little wee corner pieces on it, and this is going to go in here and replace this section of pavement. So the first thing I'm going to do is trace out around the shape of this particular driveway entrance and the curved part, then have to cut out that section of pavement, and then with this piece here I'm then going to shave off the edge of the MDF to get a slight ramp that leads up onto the pavement. And interestingly, the comment about this driveway entrance was that often the cobblestone actually continued out to the street curb rather than vehicles driving over paving slabs. So we'll apply a bit of additional cobblestone through this area here and see how it goes. Right, so that's got the pavement section cut out and the corners sort of rounded off, and that fits in reasonably well there. So it was a bit of a mission actually cutting that out, because it's absolutely critical that I don't damage any of this structural stuff that's sitting here so close. So now I'm just going to shave an edge or ramp off this component. So it's the bulk of the MDF chiseled off the edge where the pavement is, so we'll just tidy that up with some files just to even it out and smooth it. So that's now the driveway entrance carved into a reasonable sort of fashion, and what we're going to do is work in some cobblestone brick texture here for this component. So I've now installed the drop section of kerb into place, and I think it's sort of worked out reasonably well. So we now are able to run some vehicles, some lorries into the coal yard. So the only thing left for me to do is I've just got to touch up around these corner sections in here where there's a bit of MDF exposed, and then I can actually install some gates on the entranceway. So we'll now start looking at the assembly of the roof, and as I mentioned, the plan is to make these roofs detachable, so if need be I can get in there to possibly rewire or place wiring, but also it's probably just out of interest really, if anyone was curious to really want to have a look at the interior detail that's actually going into these workshops. So what I've done is actually made up some laser cut roof framing which will be attached to the base structure of the roof. So there'll be another layer that goes over the top of this, which will actually have the roof material attached to it, which of course is this iron type cladding material to go on top. So we've got these wee supporting struts that go on each side of the wall, and they'll sort of be positioned in on each edge down below here in the recess. So what I've got to do is cover these first in some paper texture, and then also actually assemble these two roof components. Now what I'm planning on doing is, because this is actually inside the actual roof cavity section, there needs to be an easy way of being able to lift these roofs out. So what I'm actually going to do is, I've got some neodymium magnets here, and I'm just going to pop one magnet, glue it to the underside of this roof, and of course just using anything that's metal, screwdriver or pair of tweezers or something, I should be able to just pop that over the top of the roof and be able to lift the roof out. So that's the theory behind that. So this is the other roof section here, and once again I did do a little bit of trimming to make sure that this actually sort of fits in here reasonably well. So the next process of course will be doing some of this roof texture, which I'm going to apply to a separate piece of card, which will be some of the very thin black card that I've got, and then once I've done that, then I will apply it over the top of this base structure. So I've now got the base structure of these roof components assembled and also spray painted. Now the only issue of course I encountered is we now have some rather large giant magnets in the roof here, which aren't ideal, but unfortunately the little wee neodymium magnets that I've got, and these are the only ones I had, which are quite small, just simply weren't really strong enough to use, and unfortunately I didn't have a slightly larger size, so I'll put these in here. It's not ideal, but they're sort of kind of disguised a little bit, and they're not going to be seen to a great extent. So we're now going to apply these outer roof sections to the main structures, and they've been trimmed to sort of fit within the roof cavity section. So we're just going to use a bit of PVA glue and apply these. And one other component that I thought I'd have a crack at, and that is this little wee thing here, which is a tiny little wee extractor fan. So this has just been laser cut out of the 0.6mm black card, and then I've sort of twisted the blades a little bit and then just glued a little bit of plastic to either side to sort of give the representation of a fan. And this is actually going to go into one of those vent components in the top half of the roof, so I'll show you that in a minute and we'll get that installed. Whether or not it can really be seen is another story, but I just thought I'd have a go and see how it turned out. So I've now finished off the roofs and also just put a little bit of grey card as the ridging. I tend to prefer to use some coloured card because then if it does get scratched or anything like that, it's just grey all the way through. There's no white underneath there. So with that now complete, and with a stainless steel ruler, you can simply pop the roof off. So it just saves having to turn the building upside down, and that's the rafters inside, and then of course I can get access into the building for lighting and things like that, and the same applies to this one. That's got the magnet of course underneath as well, and they just simply lift off. So there was a little bit of trimming and things that I had to do to get it to fit more accurately, and I've installed the fan in the vent on this side because I sort of thought, well, if this is going to be the boiler repair workshop, then they'll be working away with welding and all sorts of stuff like that, and this is the space that I'll actually have the arc welder in. So I'll have the fan in there, and it's probably a little bit of a kind of over the top detail, I guess, in a way, because you're never really going to see it, but I just thought, I just wanted to see if I could do it and create this little wee laser cut 0.6mm black card fan with some little bits of plastic glued to either side. So there we have it. So I'm just preparing to put some coal into these coal staves, and interestingly, if I go back and look at my previous video, I pronounced that incorrectly. I left the T out. For some reason I was calling them coal staves, which they are not, they are coal staves. So I knew there was something wrong when I was saying that word. So what I've actually done is, rather than actually just fill these coal staves up with coal right from the base, I've just made up some little wee high density foam components that are going to slot in here, and then I'm just going to glue the coal granules over the top. So what I'm actually using is this stuff here. Now I think I got this from a chap who repairs or restores scuba diving gear, and I think this is the granules that are used in the filters for the air tanks. So I think it's granulated carbon of some sort, and I believe this is also actually used in filters for fish tanks as well. So I think I picked this up for a couple of dollars. It was cheap and there's plenty of it, and it does actually really look like coal, which is quite good. So we're just going to glue these in here first, and then I'm just going to spread glue over the top and stick an initial layer of these granules down, and once that's dry, then I'll probably sprinkle additional layers over the top, and then just drizzle some watered down PVA, much like the process used for making ballast for the tracks, and sort of pile it up a little bit more. Right, so I'm just going to let that dry now, and once that's dry, then of course I'll tap the excess off, then we'll top this up with some more granules, and then I'll use the watered down PVA method to glue that in. But with the base granules fixed to the full strength glue, I'm going on the theory that when I drizzle over the watered down glue, it's not all just going to pour off and wash away the granules. So I've now completed the coal staves, and what I did, as I mentioned, is once that base layer of coal had dried, I then sprinkled more coal over the top and then drizzled a 50-50 solution of PVA glue and water, much like you do with ballasting, as I mentioned, and let that set. So we now have quite solid coal loads in each of the staves. So the plan obviously here is, once I've fixed this coal staves into place, then of course there'll be more coal that will actually be spilt out onto the cobblestone area, and of course it'll be ground up quite considerably with black weathering powders and so forth, because this area would be pretty grimy and filthy. So the last little wee item to add to this yard, of course, is some gates to go on the vehicle entrance. Now, as luck would actually have it, I had a section of leftover fence that I rescued from the original street area, which I'd made up some years ago, and it fitted perfectly in here. So I've chopped it in half, added in a little bit of extra bracing on the back, and we're just going to glue these wooden fences into here against the pillars. And that's our wooden gates, which I'm going to have in the open position because obviously I may have some lorries or some form of vehicles coming to collect sacks of coal, so I think that sort of worked out quite well. So I've definitely made a little bit more progress with the coal merchant's yard and workshop buildings. So we've now got our wooden gates in here, which I think kind of ties in quite nicely with slightly more rustic looking feel. And then of course we've now got our sliding positionable workshop doors, and then we've also got our lift out roof components for being able to peer in and look at the detail that will eventually be on the inside. And of course there's a fan hidden in behind this grill here, which of course you can't really see from this side, but I know it's there, so it just adds that little bit of interest. And then of course tucked around the back we've got our coal staves, which have now been loaded with some coal. So some final things to finish off, of course, for the main structural components, of course, is adding some capping stones to the top of these walls, and I'll use a method of laser cutting out strips of card, which will then have the engraved line in it, and then of course that will be drizzled with some of the super glue. So essentially they'll be very similar in appearance to the capping stones for the brick walls. And then I think once that is actually complete, then it'll be getting into the weathering phase for the yard and really sort of griming it up quite a bit, plus some weathering to the workshop buildings. And once that's done, then we can actually start looking at populating the yard. So there'll be sacks of coal, there will be the odd lorry or two that will be in there, and then of course there'll be labourers who will be shoveling coal and all of that type of stuff. So there we have it for the coal merchant's yard, and as I mentioned, there is still quite a number of things to work on with this yard, which I'll progress on over the next week or two. So as always, do take care, look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.